have this, analogy that like the amount of revenue that your business does correlates to how much the universe gives a fuck that you exist tomorrow.
My guest today is Tim Ray, a four-time founder who's built and sold multiple companies from consumer brands to e-commerce portfolios, and now is a B2B fintech business. He sold his first company 10 months after launch for just over $2 million, and his second, Carnivore Club, went through multiple exits, including as part of an $18 million public company acquisition.
Carnivore Club, we had scaled to Canada, the US, UK, and Australia. We grew Carnivore Club to just under like 4 million in sales. And I put into another risky bet into what was called Renter at the time, which now has become Verifast. We're over 80 employees. We have scaled to over 10 million in revenue, ARR. We bootstrapped it on less than 3 million in seed capital. I was in a really dark space at the time. I literally was, having mental health issues where, my wife actually made me go to visit the hospital.
Tim, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Awesome to see you again.
You too. Let's dive right into the beginning of this with Food Scrooge. Let's start at the win that kicked everything off for you and your entrepreneurial journey. You win $150,000 in a Queen's MBA competition. You build Food Scrooge, a group buying platform for bulk frozen food, and sell it just 10 months later for just over $2 million. $100,000 upfront, $2 million in earnout, and you crush the earnout. That's a killer first chapter of first success. What did that early success set in motion for you? What was that like?
Definitely a bit of a horseshoe up my butt in terms of like the ability to like right timing at the market with like this group buying space that I sold it kind of at the peak of the market, where if you were to fast forward like a year and a half after that, there's no way that that deal gets done because the fundamentals of group buying in e-commerce just were not very sound. But in terms of, I really manifested that I wanted to be an entrepreneur back when I was like 21. And the only reason why I actually followed through on starting Food Scrooge was because when I was 29, sitting in my MBA, which is also one of the things I, put on a bucket list in my early 20s to accomplish, was that I wanted to be a full-time entrepreneur. And there's never a right time, but is that I'd rather I made my fear of regret bigger than my fear of failure. And therefore getting into Food Scrooge, even though I didn't know anything about e-commerce, I didn't know anything about group buying, I didn't know anything about starting a company, just like naive, insane belief in my ability to solve problems and figure it out, to incorporating the business online, selling it by September 2011, 10 months later for 2.1 million. That was a whirlwind ride. And that $2.1 million nut, of which you're right, I crushed the earnout and got a really nice, 7-figure check from Torstar in the beginning of 2013, really helped set me up that I could then go and have a second swing as an entrepreneur doing Carnivore Club, which was my second venture. I was really only an entrepreneur for like 10 months, really only in market selling a product for like 8 weeks before we had our LOI to sell. And so, then I was back doing my earnout as an employee with Torstar for a year and a half. And so I felt like, I was like, it's such a whirlwind. It's like, what just happened? You're almost like, blinked and it was like already over. Right. And you're trying to like reconcile like, okay, like, was I just lucky? Is this skill? Is this talent? Is it grit? I thought this might be my one and only venture that I would start. So much so that when I got my earnout check from Torstar, and I joke about this because I made them issue me my earnout check in a paper check, because I wanted to relish going into like a bank teller with like $1 million check to like cash it, because like this might be my only shot of like feeling this like level of like victory and this like accomplishment. And I think all early founders, you don't know what you're capable of until you've already done it. But yeah, I think I still remember vividly in Food Scrooge, sitting in class, I have this idea during class about group buying for bulk frozen meats. And then in January, I'm literally like making my very first call to like a grocery store, Michelangelo's, which is no longer around, but there's like 2 locations back in the day, pitching them on this idea of using their back, like non-retail freezer in the back of their store to act as like a free distribution hub for us to then sell food service, like bulk, like 10-pound boxes of like protein for our clients to go in and pick up in their store, with the idea that they will do a free fulfillment for me in exchange for me bringing them new clients that will potentially then convert to shoppers at Michelangelo's, right?
They're holding. They're holding your inventory, no need for space. That's a
Right.
very lean, very clever model.
Yeah. We're creating like a brand new supply chain that never existed before.
Of curiosity, when you think about the decision to sell so quickly, and you had thought, is this the only one trick pony, the one shot that I have? Um, and something you said just about naivete. I also had this when I was building my first few companies. There's this sort of beautiful naivete where you're like, I'm just gonna gun it. I'm gonna go for it. I'm gonna send it, right? And so you do, but then you start to see this traction. There's clearly value exchanged. What was going through your mind when you explored your options? Because you could have stayed and held the asset. You could have kept building. What was it for you to go, no, this makes sense to sell it so quickly? And do you have any regrets about that as you look back on that decision?
I literally aced that first startup like as best as I could, like 10 out of 10. When you start to get into it and you're like, okay, to work with like food service distributors to sell their excess inventory, to do just in time inventory delivery. Like we would sell online for a hot week. Like for 1 week, we'd sell online like 7, 8 items.
Right.
And then if you try to sell something that has like multiple flavors, which we did a few times, and then the employees giving the wrong thing to the wrong person, there was like deal find, team buy, Groupon, like there's literally like dozens of like group buying companies in Canada, right?
Yeah.
And the cost to acquire customers was way higher than we thought it was going to be. And so we
Right.
had built up a decent list of, call it like 10, 20,000, 30,000, and we had done a couple 100,000 in sales by the time that we had our first acquisition conversation. But I knew that, we had maybe $80,000 left in the bank. Again, it was me and one employee that was,
Yeah.
in his first job. He was like an intern. And I just knew that we were going to like run out of money before we solved the customer acquisition problem. And
Ah,
so I also knew when I was launching this company that like we had a really unique business model, and there's a lot of other bigger players that are well funded that were basically all selling the same thing, competing head to head on like deals
right.
for restaurants, spas, all these different things. But the uniqueness of what we were doing in grocery, nobody could really copy because they had to really know the nomenclature of how to speak to, the grocery store people, how to speak to like the food service people, how to like actually do the deals and right.
Yeah.
And so I knew that like I had this like a really niche play on an emerging market trend of group buying, and that at the right time we would be, in a competitive situation uh, with multiple people able to bid on adding this as a differentiation factor for their business. And
Yeah.
so as soon as I saw that, my hypothesis on our scale and like exit velocity and being able to acquire customers was not ringing true, I started having early conversations um, with originally it was Team Buy and
Mm,
Gassan Halazan and those guys. They were on Dragon's Den back in 2010, and they had a very memorable exchange with um, Robert Herjavec, and that
mm.
so our original deal was to do deal with Team Buy, but then we didn't have a lot of negotiating power, and those guys were definitely trying to like get their way, and we also had a chatting deal find at the time, which was another big player at the time. So we ended up having like a three-way conversation on who we were going to sell to like tilt the dynamics of the negotiation in
Yeah.
our favor. And so
You
for
were
me
running
at the
your own
time,
auction at this time to make it competitive, create some tension. Nice.
due diligence done, sold in September. I literally got married the day after the deal closed,
Oh, incredible.
the first time. And yeah, and so that was a crazy whirlwind. And then the Dragons Den episode aired, I think, in November of 2011, like 2 months after the deal was done.
Did that make you more cautious as you thought about allocating your capital that you had hard earned, knowing it might be the last in your head and your mindset? Or did that make you more bullish on like, let me go, let's go and place some bets with my own capital?
Yeah, it was a great question. I think I had this idea that I forget what the dollar figure was, but that I would be able to work for a certain period of time with no salary, right? And
Yeah.
every startup I've ever done, so we use
Yeah.
Indiegogo as our thing because like, you're like, how do you go to these suppliers of charcuterie to get enough orders to that you can want to do your deal, right?
Right.
And so we pre-sold a bunch on Indiegogo and did a whole campaign there. And then at that same time is actually when Joanna Griffiths at Nixware was just doing her first Kickstarter, and I actually took some of my cash from Food Scrooge and actually then became one of the initial pre-seed investors in Nixware. We would have this amazing deal on one time we did a deal with Pampers and we sold like over $500,000 in a week on Pampers.
Hmm.
But the next time we did that deal, we only sold 150,000. And so what happened with like the whole idea of group buying is that you killed the perception of value. Because every time you ran a deal, you would like sell less, or the excitement would
Right.
be less for the next time you sold it. What I saw with subscription e-commerce and, in my earnout year, luckily, is when the whole Dollar Shave Club, blew up and that whole, famous video that was very funny that people like loved. And there's
Yeah.
tons of copycats. And I was like, you know what? I think the whole idea of like content and in storytelling is going to be a lot more compelling in this whole subscription space. At the
Interesting.
same time, I see there's like lots of like one of the month clips, right? And lots of like
Right.
fragmentation and storytelling. And this whole idea of like you could have a cap saw from like 1,000 different wineries and it's going to have a uniquely different taste profile and or story just because of the soil, the grape, the guy, all these different things that go into why like every single cap saw is not the same, right?
Mm.
The same thing exists in charcuterie because I came from like a farming background. I was like, wow, if I could do something that's like more high value, like less commoditized,
Right.
and I don't know
You find
why,
your niche. You
you know,
found a
I,
niche.
I don't know how it came together again, but I just had this idea, like this, like wine of the month club, but for charcuterie, because it's like dehydrated, condensed meat. So it's like the highest value food group of like protein, right? And then when
Right.
you dehydrate it and like cure it, it then like 4x is the value, right? Because you're getting rid of the moisture, and then it becomes shelf stable and like lightweight, so it's easier to ship.
Yeah.
And so the thesis around that was that like I could like have 100 different Spanish guys making chorizo, and each chorizo is going to be different. I can have infinite amounts of stories and product to sell, right? And so we launched with Indiegogo, and the idea of that go to market was like, all right, let's go can the US first. Let's come up with a very sophomoric video that would be easy, like instantly shareable, like the Dollar Shave Club video. And again, I think we definitely pushed the needle because we wanted to rise above the noise, right? And we
Mm.
we also wanted to own one category, like be like the meat of the month club for guys, and we were
Yeah.
definitely the gifting item for a lot of guys across North America, especially ones that like meat.
How big did it get when you were approached or when that acquisition seemed to surface for you?
For
What did it
Carnival Club.
look like? Yeah, what did it look like if you were to look around at that moment when you were looking at the acquisition path? What did the size of the business look like, the picture? Just to give a
Um,
sense.
yeah, so Carnival Club, we had scaled to Canada, the US, UK, and Australia, but I ran Carnival Club from 2013 to 2019, um, and we grew Carnival Club to just under like 4 million in sales. So it was not a huge business. And I had also acquired three other businesses on top of it.
Walk me through that just in terms of so you're building Carnivore Club, you get it to a certain point, it's all transactional revenue. Or no, it isn't because it's a subscription box. You had
Yeah.
recurring revenue. Was that 4 million in ARR in terms of size and scale?
Yeah. And I guess the one thing with like the whole subscription box space was that like you could send people for a subscription with like a 3 month minimum, but also
Right.
people, like a lot of people would churn after like 3 to 6 months, right? Like after
Right.
like,
Okay.
right. And we found that like, although my hypothesis on this idea of like, shelf stable, cured, high value protein to be able to give somebody something in the mail for the equal value of their local substitute
Right.
was valid. Charcuterie, in terms of people's like overall diet, is like a very small percentage. Most people don't have charcuterie on a given week. So we started sending them like a pound and a half of meat in the mail every month. It
Right.
starts to like add up, right? And if you
Right.
pound through it, like it's funny, like a pound and a half of charcuterie is actually a lot of meat. And so,
It would be. It would be.
yeah, and so we would find that like people cancel just because they get like inundated with charcuterie.
So very
Um,
giftable, but not necessarily seeing the longevity and the sustainability with an individual customer. So it still
yeah.
sounds like you were having to continue to transact and bring more people in, more
So
alike to pure e-commerce at
yeah,
that
and I'd
time.
say like our first year we did maybe $500,000-600,000 in revenue. Our first year
Yeah.
we got to like 1.1 million in our second year. Our
Yeah.
third year we got like two and a half, high twos of revenue, and then our fourth year it's like really like like plateau. We like barely grew to like, like low threes. And
Yeah.
that's when I'm like, okay, do I want to do this like little small business? And the other thing with e-commerce is the game is always changing. Like the
Yeah.
ad strategy, SEO, how you're acquiring clients literally can like change on a dime. It's very unraveling when like
And
also
you're
like
at the whim of the platforms if you're doing paid, which is something very true today. But what I'm hearing as a through line that's still true today is this idea of building an audience, thinking through the storytelling, thinking through how you bring people into your world that you've created. And you did create a world focused on, the dude who was like, I want to buy into this sort of this
yeah.
ethos that you created. But in terms of guy commerce, so then you go, okay, I'm building this thing. Maybe it's you mentioned small business, so using your words, right? Like you get to a certain point, you're seeing growth kind of start to stall. When did you start to go, okay, I want to do a roll up. I want to actually start acquiring some companies and doing a focus on this guy profile, this ICP you went after.
Yeah. I think my idea was that like Karma Club had like capped like ceiling.
Yeah.
Charcuterie is actually not was Karma Club Canada was bigger than Karma Club US, even though US is 10 times the amount of people.
Yeah.
And then it's like for whatever reason I could not get the Karma Club US to scale like 10 times the size of Canada. I was like, all right, I need to add on other businesses where we could like cross pollinate the email lists
Yeah.
and like get some synergies. And
Makes
so I
sense.
came across a
Same
company called
buyer.
same buyer, like theoretically, right? And so we got my first acquisition was a company called Broquet. So like Broquet. Think of like if you ever seen like, man crates, it was like a version of like man crates.
Right.
And I bought that for I think like $200,000 and with like an earnout. So I didn't pay it up cash up front. I bought it with like, a bit of cash, but mostly like percentage of sales for a certain period of
Deal
time.
structure. Deal structure matters for those listening. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think that's the biggest thing too, when you're trying to maximize your sale value, to agree
Yeah.
that you can trust or have security against the asset and or the person, always opt for some sort of earnout process to agree that like also the earnout's very clear. It's not convoluted.
Yeah.
So I've done that multiple times. Then I bought another company called Barbecue Box, which was like it was a US company that was basically like different barbecue spices and sauces and like little gadgets every month.
Yeah.
Um, and then I bought another one called Spartan Carton, which was like a health and wellness, muscle workout gear, supplements, all that kind of stuff. And so I had these, and they were also on all different e-commerce platforms. So Barbecue Box and Spartan Cart were on Cratejoy. Brocade was on Shopify. I made the huge mistake of building Karma Club. It was originally like a custom build because there's no subscription e-commerce software when I first built it in 2013.
Hmm.
And when I had to rebuild it because things get spaghetti coded after a while, I switched to wanting to build it on Magento, which was
Ah,
like
yes.
way too big, way too bulky, way too expensive. It was a nightmare. Um, so this whole idea of like this roll up of one e-commerce platform across all these companies and all these brands that would cross pollinate. The one thing that fell flat was we were not getting any crossover on the purchases. Like the
So the
Spartan Carton guys,
synergies, if you
yeah,
will, with that ICP, that man, the male, I don't know, what do you call him? Like 35, roughly the way you were kind of shaping this demo.
yeah.
This male dude buyer, basically, for lack of it, the guy. So you weren't seeing synergies with your email list, with your back office. Was there any synergy in this, or was that part of the challenge in the learning from that build?
There was some synergy in terms of taking like the Slag inventory from, say, Karma Club, and I could put that into like a Brocade, or I could take
Right,
some extra stuff from a Brocade, and like you could like do promos across the board. So the idea of like sharing inventory or
right.
leftover inventory was valid. The idea of consolidating the fulfillment into like one distribution center and having one person coordinate that fulfillment was valid.
Yeah.
We never got to a point where we could have put them all into one platform. And again, they were all small brands that I bought. So then you just like end up buying like four different brands that you have to then market individually. And it just ended up becoming a bit of a nightmare. So the fun part is, come 2019, I now have four e-commerce companies that are like kind of just like doing this.
Right.
And I'm also getting tired of becoming like the like single A baseball entrepreneur, right? Where I had this like nice exit with Food Scrooge early on, a couple $1 million. Um, Karma Club is now like doing like Karma Club and all the brands are doing kind of like high fives, like maybe $6 million in revenue.
Yeah.
And I'm like, but that's like, and that sounds amazing for most people, but for me, that was like, man, I'm just like, like small ball entrepreneur, right? I want to do something big. And so that's when like my co-founder at the time, this guy, Matt Cloutier, for Karma, we had a small stake in Karma Club, was like, I have this idea for private aviation. And, you know, and I just had this innate desire to do something that's like not meat. Cause like now I'm like I grew up in a farm,
And
like dairy
not
farmers.
e-commerce. Oh, dairy
Right.
farmer background. I was curious because where does this come from? I'm hearing this like this fire in your story of like, I want to not prove myself, but just like I have a career bucket list and I want X and it has to be entrepreneurial. Like there's this innate drive that I'm hearing in
Mhm.
you. I'm curious, where do you think that comes from?
I have my favorite person growing up was my grandmother on my mom's side. And she would tell me like with her cute accent, like you're gonna be a big businessman one day, right? In combination with me coming from the country where you don't have a lot of like business role models,
Right.
um, and being a kid that was undiagnosed, like ADD, just like, bouncing off walls, you know what I mean? Not doing things like the easy way. I've developed like a huge chip on my shoulder. For me, I have like this like giant chip of like I need to prove to myself, and I also need to prove to my like younger self and to my grandmother that she was right. I am going to be the big
Oh,
business guy, right? I think that's the biggest chip is to this grind that like when my time's done, that I swung as hard as I
yeah.
could swing and did everything, and I left it all on the table.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay,
so yeah,
that's
yeah.
beautiful. First of all, she sounds like a very special woman, and to see that early on, and then for you, like, she clearly saw your fire, this sort of juice that keeps you going around, like, "I wanna build, I wanna create." And then it sounds like with this, you had that early success, which was tremendous to give you, like, the confidence probably to be like, "Actually, yes, she saw something, and yes, I believe, what I believed in myself. Here's evidence, here's facts." And then you're building this portfolio play, this like mini private equity kind of roll up play, which looks great on paper. And to your point, it's a great business. Like that's a nice small business, but you get to this point where you go, but I think I'm built for something bigger. What's the next step? And so you're operating this portfolio. You have the idea with your co-founder to start an private aviation company, Chirp, totally outside of the space that you had started to build your reputation in. Um, and you're doing all this. What was life like for you at this time? I mean, this is a lot. We only have so many hours in the day, and ultimately, time is a source of capital. So, how did you think about allocating your time, and how did you think about making that transition on into the
Um,
next step?
I didn't even wait for the next step. I kept running those 4 companies, and then I started my 3rd company, Jet Savvy, and, like, didn't know what burnout was until that time
Mm,
when then, as you can imagine, don't have time, I'm neglecting my 4 e-commerce companies, I'm having my employees run it. Morale starts to tank because 'cause I'm, like, not doing that, I'm focusing on
yeah.
jets because I wanna do something that's, like again, coming from farming background, 2 startups that are in the meat space, you know, people start to say, like, "How's the meat business?" I'm like, "Oh, man, I just wanna punch you in the face." You know what I mean?
Right,
I have this,
right.
like,
So you're like, I'm trying to carve a different
I'm trying
version of myself, right?
I don't
If I'm hearing
yeah.
you.
Yeah, I don't wanna be known as, like, the, you know, country boy that's, like, small time entrepreneur, like, e-commerce meat guy, right? So that therefore, I,
Yeah,
like, lean all into Jet Savvy. And then, in like beginning of 2018 and over the course of 2018, when I raised $1.5 million, where I've never raised capital before, but I do it.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but then 2019, things start to like burn to the ground on my e-commerce companies. They're all
Right.
like losing money. I'm getting like feed to death, like all these 3PLs, and you
Mm,
can like lose your shirt on like 3PLs, like on pick fees and all these special project fees, and like not consolidating skids properly. And so then I literally had to like sell. I got to the point where like all 4 companies were failing on the e-commerce side. They're like losing. And I put a lot of my um, cash to keep them afloat. And then I'm leading this company called Jet Savvy because like private jet sounds cooler than doing like, subscription e-commerce meet or whatever. And then that's, again, I get to this point with my co-founder where we failed to launch that startup, and now I have like everything's like a dumpster fire,
Oh
and I have
my
to figure
God.
out and pick a lane. So long story short is I ended up being able to find, because I think when you're in a tough spot, it comes down to trust and character, and like people knowing that you're like not trying to trick them. That
Mm,
if I'm going to sell you this asset, that it's like a legit good asset, and I'm not just trying to pass the hot potato, but I
hmm
don't have bandwidth for it. So I was able to sell Carnival Club to my friends over at BattleBox, John Roman, and his partners, and then I was able to sell. Luckily, I was able to sell all three other companies: Broquet, RP Box, and Spartan Crime to another guy at this company called Top Choice Supplements. And so, in the course of like 60 days in the spring of 2019, when I'm like very depressed, very
mm,
dejected because nothing's working,
yeah,
I was able to sell that. And listen, I sold it for just over like 1.2 million, something like that. Like nothing crazy.
yeah,
Better than kick in the ass. Should have been a lot
yeah,
more, but that was probably the best, highest skilled exit I did, was to be able to sell all those companies that were losing money at the time for money to like bail myself out, so I could then focus on Jet Savvy, which I wanted to really be my big swing to
yeah.
do something bigger.
And so you made the decision, okay, I'm going to exit these businesses because it sounded like your heart, your sense of self wasn't with that anymore. You kind of done the thing, you checked the box and you wanted to evolve. And so you do make those deals happen, which is not easy to do considering where the business was. But let's talk about you as you think about the build you're in now. And we'll start to shift towards this journey you're on with Verifast and this being a completely different scale than these others in a completely different industry as well. Like this is pure
Yeah,
software. This is B2B. It's a total You've had this portfolio of experiences, and I keep coming back to this sense of self and identity and this chip on your shoulder of wanting to prove yourself as an entrepreneur. But knowing when to fold them, knowing when to walk away, uh, gamblers coming in here, truly is a skill that I don't think a lot of us talk about because you're told as an entrepreneur, you got to go all in, you got to commit, you got to be resilient, you got to be gritty. And yet, you do have to look at the facts and know the cards you have in your hand and know what you're playing and what game you're playing. What
yeah.
advice would you have for entrepreneurs who, keep hearing that narrative of stick it out, grind, be gritty, when maybe the cards are not in their favor? Like, how do you think about the mindset you need to have to look at your decision set and know whether to sell, walk away, shut down? In this case, shut down or sell. What's your perspective?
It's funny. I've honed this over the last quite a few years, where in Food Scrooge and in Carnival Club, and starting those businesses
Yeah.
before they even became in existence. Like I could literally picture them in my head, that like I could see, touch, and taste what the success looked like. I could actually
Yeah.
see people going to the grocery store at Food Scrooge and picking up the order, and like why it made sense, because it's like this like leftover food
So
service.
clear.
It's like
So clear.
Costco and steroids, right? The value
Totally.
proposition was clear. I didn't need to do like a survey to understand the
Yeah.
market. I just like know that, like, yes,
Self-evident.
like 1 + 2
Yeah.
+ 3 = 6. If that's
Yeah.
true, then this is going to work, right?
Yeah.
Same thing with Karma Club. I didn't really know that like this was a huge problem solving, but it was a fun business. The farm to table movement, to trying to like tell stories for like smaller people, I could really like romanticize and why that would work. And
Yeah.
so therefore, like I leaned into it. And so when you can like, if I can like really like touch, taste, see the success or how this product's supposed to be work in the future, and all the short-term noise just becomes like all the short-term turbulence just becomes noise, because
Yeah.
where you're going
Yeah.
and like what it's going to look like.
Yeah.
In Jet Savvy, for example, that was my biggest, hubris, where
Mm.
4 years, again, I didn't take a salary for 4 years. I also put $1 million of cash in the business, and I lived like I was not going to lose for 4 years. So my all in was over $3 million of money that I lost
Wow.
in opportunity cost on Jet Savvy
Mm.
slash Chirp, when we rebranded it, when I had a co-founder hookup, um, shake up. And, in that 4 years, I didn't know anything about private aviation. I didn't know the fundamentals. I didn't know the nomenclature on the language and the terms. I was literally like drinking through a fire hose to learn private aviation from scratch. I had no business or right to win in private aviation, just kind of like willing it to win because I wanted to do something that was like not me. You know
Right.
what I mean?
So badly.
And
Yeah, I can
yeah,
feel that in your story here.
right. And then it was like that death by a thousand slices because we were supposed to, we had this idea in the fall of 2017. I raised capital in 2018. We're building through it to 2018. We're supposed to like launch at in the beginning of 2019. All of a sudden, like there's no platform. Me and my co-founder have like a complete like breakdown.
Mm,
I'm like, all right, do I put this thing in the ground or do I like keep going? I My current wife at the time, who I just met, introduced me to a second co-founder for this company to bring it back from the ashes.
mm,
Boy, do I wish I did not bring it back from the ashes because I should have just like left it in the ground.
mm,
And that extra 2 years from like spring 2019 to 2021 just like compounded the losses. And
yeah,
I couldn't see, touch, or taste like what this was going to be in the future.
yeah.
The fundamentals were flawed, like the business fundamentals were flawed as well. But I was just trying to like, I had a lot of friends and family that invested in Jet Savvy. I didn't
Oh,
want
yeah.
to fail them, right? Like it's almost like I was like taking it on my back for them. Um,
So the fear of
and
failure, would you say when you're thinking about the decisions to double down, to keep going, how much of it was related to fear? It sounds like it was more fear than it was the opportunity and the evidence and the traction that the business itself had. It
it
sounded like
was,
this was very intertwined with your identity and your personal life, which is hard to separate, I know, as founders.
yeah. I mean, you can imagine in Food Scrooge and Karma Club, I did not take any outside money. Right, I got very lucky in Food Scrooge.
Yeah.
That gave me the cash to invest in Karma Club. Karma Club is the next, and Jet Savvy was the first one where coming off 2 wins, right? Um, even though Karma Club was an awesome win, I still like had an exit, like is
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
It wasn't a zero, and I didn't want to like let my first co-founder be right or win by like it not working. I wanted to win
Mm,
in spite of him. I also wanted to win
mm,
because the first time that all of my friends and family put money into a company that I'm leading, that it goes bust, right?
yeah.
So there's a
Yeah.
lot of these things that I
Oh, it's pressure,
continued on,
tremendous
and
pressure.
then finally when we go to launch in fall 21, um, a lot of like enthusiasm, momentum. We finally have a product. We finally have platform clients that are going to use this platform. It was basically Just Happy was a Chirp was a it ended up being like a Shopify platform that for like private jet brokers, like a white
Right.
label platform that had all the intricate quote to book to workflows for a private jet charter. And when we go to launch, it's like the engagement was like zero, like very low. Like there's like
Mm,
all these other little things that people wanted to be able to do to make it like a complete platform. And I was like,
mm,
every month I was putting like 20, 30, 40K into this platform to
yeah.
cover the costs. And I was like, man, this is when we go to launch and all of a sudden like everyone's like, oh, why are you not sending out quotes? Oh, like this, and this reason. I'm like, man, this is not an easy fix.
Mm,
And
mm,
I was like, and literally from like me having my birthday to like the next week, and I'm like realizing I have to put this thing in the ground. And I just
ugh,
had an investor update that was like very positive about the bullishness, and then all of a sudden like lights out. It was like
mm.
whiplash.
Oh my god.
And I was in a really dark space at the time. I literally was, having, mental health issues where, my wife actually made me go to, visit the hospital because I was having like, because you're like, your entire self worth is like wrapped up in this like startup. And I've literally just like washed most of the, you know, money I've accrued over the last few years through Jet Savvy and Food Scrooge down the tube with this thing. Luckily, though, in 2020, I met my current co-founders, Chad and Craig, and one of Chad's dad, who was my first mentor from Food Scrooge, was an investor in Jet Savvy, and he's like, "I want you to meet my son and see if you think this idea is any good or not." And so, like summer 2020, luckily, um, I was able to take my, uh, you know, 100. 50 grand or whatever. And take, take the like kind of like the last like non, like liquid cash that I was gonna be able to put into something as I was burning money on Jet Savvy. And I put it into another risky bet into, what was called Rent at the time, which now has become Verifast. Literally like I have like 100 grand left. You're like, what do you do? Well, I'm not gonna be able to be an employee and work my way out of like getting back to where I was. It's
Yeah.
like I better take another all in bet. And luckily that all in bet that I took in 2020, Jet Savvy was going nowhere fast.
What a
Uh,
ride. My
and
God. What
so
a
I
ride.
invested in that company with Chad and Craig, thinking that in the back of my mind is like, all right, there's a higher than not probability that Just Savvy is not going to work, and that
Yeah.
if I invest and become the first money in on Verifast, it could be my fallback to go in. And that's what happened in fall 2021. Just Savvy went in the ground. 2 weeks later, I was CEO of Verifast, or Rentify, uh, um, helping to lead this company as a co-founder as well.
You're the first money in, you see an opportunity, you take your last check, your last bit of capital that you have after you've gone through this really dark, really, really dark period. And thank you for being so open to share that because I don't think founders talk about the darkness, the mental health, the struggle enough. And this is what myself included, we have all there's an element of this that we are facing, mostly in the shadows, mostly behind the scenes. So thank you for sharing that. But walk me through where you are now. You're literally going through now a software company. You're in the B2B space, Verifast. Give us the quick headline and then ultimately the picture of your life now. What do you wake up? What does it look like? And what are you looking forward to and in this build? What's different?
Well, the good news is that the whole process from Food Scrooge to Karma Club to Jet Savvy to now very fast. I really like put in my 10,000 hours, right? And so
Yeah.
you really build this like really the thin slice decisions, your gut feel you can trust more, right?
Hmm.
The noise is like less turbulent, right? Because you know what's
Yeah.
real and what's just like superficial or like
Yeah.
temporary. And so, we're over 80 employees. We have scaled to, over 10 million in revenue ARR. We've
Hmm.
bootstrapped it on, less than, 3 million in seed capital, equivalent to 2.5 million USD seed capital. And when I
Yeah.
talk to growth equity investors, we'll be able to do it on like 2.5. They all have like a giant, they all have like a giant stiffy because they're like, how many people can do that? Right. They're like the unicorn to be
Very
able to
capital efficient. Very capital
well,
efficient.
because of that, and the fact that I know they were solving a core problem, we had a lot of faith in our ability to solve for like raising capital in the next round in like little bits. So we could like
Mm.
raise to like not have to like over dilute and still increase
Yep.
our valuation along the way. So we raised
Yeah.
$1 million. The next year we raised $1 million from a mortgage company called M3 Group. The next year we raised like 800 grand. So only 2.8 million Canadian. And then this year I put in another 500 grand myself. And then on top of I bought out 3/4 of our other investors now. So like not only that, but coming to this growth equity round, um, you know, just about 3.5 million. And then I've bought out about 2.8 of it, personally at like extortionate, like 50% to 80% interest rates. Um,
Amazing, but it's giving you optionality in the future of the business, and so this is actually really interesting and important because a lot of founders that I meet with are going like, "How do I think about capitalization of the business? Like, how do I think about the investor pool?" I've gone through like the SF venture capital pool, but I love what I'm hearing here because I'm hearing that these folks are actually quite strategic and that they understand the problem. They're in the space. They probably could open doors from a distribution perspective. Like, this sounds like more than just cash.
yeah.
This sounds like you've built through a very strategic, thoughtful growth play alongside the capital as well.
Yeah. To your point, I mean, early on, the idea that like, you know, the easiest thing is when you don't have to sell people on the problem. If they already understand the problem, you're
Yeah. That's it.
that part's done. That part's done. Now it just comes to
Yeah.
trust and do you believe in me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that was why we went to like real estate investors as our first angel investors, right? So for anybody
Yeah.
out there that's looking at what's that equivalent to you? Who are those like early investors that you can draw on that like already understand the problem? You don't need to sell them on the fact that this market exists, right? At least to get your first like $1, $2, $3 million, right? Because I'd much rather get growth debt than than equity, right? And we all know that you can get to that 350K personally guaranteed loan from BDC. But once you get to 2 million in ARR plus, you're going to actually start to access non-personally guaranteed growth debt, right? Because it's going to be based on the fundamentals of business. If I were to have raised capital from the equity market, like from angel investors or VCs, I would have diluted our cap table like crazy, and I'd had like this like convoluted prep stack, which means
Mm.
that like those guys would get first money up before the rest of the people. Right now, we have a very clean cap table and nobody to please. We have no board, just me and my two co-founders, right? So
This
like we have
is
like
such an
ultimate
important
freedom.
point, Tim. This is
Yeah,
such an important the freedom and ultimately this idea we talk a lot about is optionality, right? You've preserved that by structuring your capital the round in a very unique way. And I'm actually hearing this from private lenders, this idea of seed strapping. You've basically raised a seed, a US level seed, I'd call it, and then you've bootstrapped the rest of the way from there. But now you're looking to fully accelerate your growth because you're at that past that $10 million ARR threshold.
yeah.
When you think about what's next for the company, where you're going, what are you looking forward to as you look ahead the next 5 years? And yeah, and why now start to look at growth equity? I imagine it's because the valuation is sizable enough where it makes sense to start trading that off a little bit more. Because equity is expensive long
Yeah,
term.
once it depends on what your vision is for your business, right? I truly think that we can build this business to be, a Shopify-esque scale type business, right? With a
Mm,
global mandate, doing something that's like really important and high utility for the world. And I have this, analogy that like the amount of revenue that your business does correlates to how much the universe gives a fuck that you exist tomorrow, right? The amount of people that even knew that you were running the business to begin with is small. So therefore the impact to most people is small, right? If Shopify stops existing tomorrow, that would be pandemonium, right?
yeah.
And with Verifast and this idea that we help renters in the United States specifically
Mm,
verify who they are, how much they make, where they work, and that whether or not they're, safe for the community, i.e. a background screening,
mhm,
right? We're
mhm.
helping renters with trust. And if you look at a global scale, right, the rental profile in the United States is actually the vast majority of the rest of the world because, renters in the United States are like, gig work, side hustle, a lot of gray economy, self-employment, all these kinds of things,
Yeah.
right? Like multiple jobs. If you go to Mexico, that's everybody. You go to India, that's like the whole country, right?
I think the fact that you're choosing to build here, first of all, says a lot about your ethos on great companies, scaled companies like the Shopify's can be built here. I'm so excited for your journey. And I also love this idea that, yes, the revenue, the scale, all of that, but the mission and the purpose behind this and the people that you're helping drives that forward. And I'm hearing that in the way that you're thinking about making a lasting impact and the legacy that you want to leave. And it sounds like for you, is this one that you're motivated? It sounds like this is a long term play. You could build this one generation. Are you building a generational company here? What's your end game,
Yeah,
if you could share?
you said it perfectly. For me, I say like purpose plus profit, right?
Yeah.
To have that perfect flywheel is it's this isn't a charity that we're building. It's a very profitable company, but it's very purposeful and intentional, and we're creating a lot of like value. I
Yeah.
think our goal is to get to 100 million in revenue within the next 36 months. Um, and from there, that's my next hurdle, right?
I
But
love it.
the more when I say 100 million in revenue, people are like, especially in Canada, they're like, "Whoa, it's like that seems like ambitious. That seems like a lot, right?"
More of us need to be talking this way and being unapologetic about it. We want to make a global
Yeah,
impact. And I love that the US is where you're going, right? Like, let's just be
yeah,
there. Let's just go. There's no border. Well, so actually, last question for you, rapid
yeah.
fire. For you, as you think about your ride that you've been on and the grit that you've established and this journey, now that you're building this one and you're building it generationally, you have this long term play. What do you think makes a company worth owning?
I think with every company that I've done, you build it to love it, right? But everything's for sale for the right time, at the right place, with the right
Yeah,
people, for the right reason, right? And so, Verifast, I can't say that, I'm going to run Verifast for 20 years. At some point, there's going to be a time to pass the baton, right? But um, for me, it's this idea that the narrative, the conversation about like why we exist and the mission that we want to accomplish,
yeah,
it's, you know, I, it's impossible to get bored doing what we're doing, right?
yeah.
Like in the size of the prize is so great that I really want to see it through. And I think also just as an example for my kids and,
Mm,
the legacy building that like I really view that I have the grit and talent and skill to be able to build, a great company. And
Yeah.
for me, I really want to see that through. I feel like the mandate, the flywheel that we have here, really has like you don't come across these ideas very often, even if
No,
we're
you
to start from
don't.
scratch, right? And so we have so much momentum, and people bought in, and me pitching the art of the possible. It's tough to not get excited about like what we're going to be doing, in the years to
Hold
come.
on. Hold on to it. I love that. And thank you so
Yeah,
much, Tim, for joining us and being so generous with sharing what you've learned. And appreciate you joining us.
cool. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks for listening to Worth Owning. If you found value in this conversation, share it with another founder who needs to hear this. Subscribe to Worth Owning for more unfiltered conversations about building enterprise value and designing the life you actually want to live. New episodes every other Wednesday.